February 18, 2001, the day NASCAR changed forever. Dale Earnhardt Sr., the Intimidator, met a tragic end in what looked like an ordinary crash at the Daytona 500. But behind that moment lies a story untold, until now. After more than 2 decades of silence, Sterling Marlin, the driver closest to the accident, finally breaks his silence. What really happened in those final seconds? And what secret has he carried all these years? This is the truth behind Dale Earnhardt's final race, told by the man who lived it, the fateful race. It was February 2001, and the Daytona International Speedway shimmered under the Florida sun. The grandstands pulsed with energy, fans waving flags, engines rumbling, and anticipation thick in the air. The Daytona 500 wasn't just another race, it was the race, the crown jewel of NASCAR. For most drivers, it represented glory. For Dale Earnhardt, it was something far deeper, a matter of honor, legacy, and family. That year, his mission went beyond personal victory. His teammates, Michael Waltrip and his own son, Dale Earnhardt Jr., were also in the running, and Dale made it his goal to help them reach victory lane. Before the race began, he spoke to his crew with quiet authority. "This is a team sport. Today, I want us to stand on top of the podium." It was pure Earnhardt, focused, fearless, and loyal to the people who raced beside him. In the days before Daytona, his team had worked tirelessly to perfect the number. 3 Chevrolet. Every inch of the car, from the roaring engine to the freshly tuned tires, reflected precision and pride. Earnhardt was ready, and everyone in the pit could feel it. Daytona had always held a special place in his heart. After 2 decades of heartbreaks and near misses, he had finally claimed victory there in 1998. By 2001, he didn't have anything left to prove. But his love for the sport and his relentless drive to lead brought him back to the track where legends were made. That morning, the tension was electric. Rivals like Sterling Marlin and Jeff Gordon were hungry for the win, and everyone knew the Daytona 500 wasn't just a contest of speed. It was a test of endurance, nerve, and willpower. "If you wanted to beat Dale at Daytona," one competitor later said, "you had to be ready for everything." He never gave an inch. As the green flag waved and the engines roared to life, all eyes turned to Dale Earnhardt. Beneath the visor, his expression was calm but fierce, the look of a man who had spent his life defying limits. What no one knew then was that this race, the one that began like so many others, would be the final chapter of his extraordinary life. The crash that shook NASCAR. February 18, 2001, the Daytona 500. What began as a thrilling race under the Florida sun ended as the darkest day in NASCAR history. On the final lap, Dale Earnhardt, the Intimidator, wasn't chasing victory for himself. He was defending it for his teammates, Michael Waltrip and his son, Dale Earnhardt Jr., who were leading the race. His role was that of a guardian, blocking the field to ensure their safe path to the finish line. At nearly 300 kilometers per hour, every twitch of the wheel, every move, meant survival. As the cars roared through the final turn, Earnhardt's black number. 3 Chevrolet held steady in 3rd place. Just behind him, Sterling Marlin's car edged closer. Then came the slightest touch, almost unnoticeable, but enough to change history. Earnhardt's car veered off balance, clipping Ken Schrader's vehicle before both slammed violently into the outside wall at turn 4. From the stands, it didn't look like the kind of crash that could end a life. But the truth was far more devastating. Traveling at more than 160 miles per hour, 257 kilometers per hour, Earnhardt's car hit the wall with a force nearly 80 times the weight of his body. The impact was instantaneous. A fatal skull fracture claimed him the moment his car came to a halt. Though he was strapped in and using the standard safety gear of the time, it wasn't enough. The hands, head, and neck support device had yet to become mandatory, and the concrete barriers offered no cushioning. The aftermath of the crash. The crash that ended Dale Earnhardt's life didn't look catastrophic at first. To those watching from the stands or on TV, it seemed like just another high-speed accident, the kind drivers often walked away from. But unseen to the crowd, the impact had been devastating. Earnhardt's car slid down the track and came to a halt against the infield grass. Moments later, Ken Schrader, whose car had also been caught in the collision, climbed out and rushed toward Earnhardt's vehicle. When he looked inside, the scene froze him in place. In that instant, Schrader knew this was unlike any crash he had ever seen. Rescue crews reached the wreck within seconds, working frantically to revive NASCAR's most iconic driver. But their efforts were futile. Minutes later, the news spread. Dale Earnhardt, the Intimidator, was gone. Shock rippled through Daytona International Speedway. The roaring cheers that had filled the air moments earlier turned to an eerie silence. Fans wept in disbelief, unable to grasp that the man who had seemed untouchable, the face of NASCAR, had been lost in an instant. But as grief swept through the racing world, anger soon followed. At the center of the storm stood Sterling Marlin, the driver whose car had made brief contact with Earnhardt's moments before the crash. Many saw him as the man responsible, the one who had caused NASCAR's darkest day. How did Sterling Marlin cope with the blame that nearly destroyed his career? And what really happened in those final seconds on the track? The truth, long buried beneath years of speculation, was finally about to surface. Sterling Marlin, the storm of criticism. Sterling Marlin never imagined that his long-respected racing career would one day be defined by tragedy, the death of Dale Earnhardt. The 2001 Daytona 500, meant to mark another thrilling start to the NASCAR season, instead became the race that changed his life forever. In the days after the crash, Marlin's name dominated headlines. Television anchors and newspapers across America echoed the same question. Was Sterling Marlin responsible for Dale Earnhardt's death? Despite NASCAR's official statement confirming that the contact between their cars was a routine racing incident, public outrage refused to fade. Grieving fans, desperate for answers, turned their pain into blame, and Sterling became the target. The man once celebrated for his talent and sportsmanship suddenly faced a wave of hostility. Hate mail poured in. Phone calls turned into threats. Strangers shouted at him at gas stations and racetracks. For a man who had built his career on quiet determination, the backlash was devastating. Still, Marlin tried to remain composed. "I did everything I could to avoid the collision," he explained softly. "But racing is dangerous. Sometimes things happen that no one can control." In the years that followed, Sterling chose silence. He didn't try to defend himself, nor did he speak publicly about that day. He knew that any words could reopen wounds for the Earnhardt family, a family that had already endured unimaginable loss. So he carried the weight of that moment in silence, letting time and truth speak for him. The weight of silence. Sterling Marlin's silence may have protected others, but it came with a heavy price. The memory of that February afternoon refused to fade. Night after night, the crash replayed in his mind. Every sound, every split second, every what if. Sleep often escaped him as one question lingered. Could I have done something differently? Deep down, Marlin knew the truth. Nothing he could have done would have changed the outcome. Yet guilt has a way of lingering, especially when the world is pointing fingers. The burden grew heavier with each passing day. Fortunately, he wasn't completely alone. Many within the NASCAR community stood by him. Fellow drivers and officials publicly defended Marlin, insisting that the tragedy was no one's fault. Jeff Gordon, one of Earnhardt's toughest rivals, said firmly, "Sterling did nothing wrong. Every racer knows collisions happen every day." Ken Schrader, who had been involved in the same crash, also spoke up. It wasn't Sterling's fault, or anyone else's, on that track that day. In the years that followed, Marlin quietly returned to racing, avoiding the cameras and controversy. "I didn't want to hurt the Earnhardt family. They'd already lost too much," he once admitted softly. It was a decision rooted in respect, one that preserved his integrity but left scars that time alone could never fully erase. After 2 decades of silence. More than 20 years after that fateful day at Daytona, Sterling Marlin finally broke his silence. Sitting in a quiet, softly lit room, a photo of Dale Earnhardt resting on the table before him, Marlin revisited the moment that had haunted him for decades, the crash that changed NASCAR forever. The 2001 Daytona 500 would always be remembered as the day the sport lost its greatest legend. Marlin had been the driver closest to Earnhardt when it happened. A light split-second contact between their cars triggered a chain reaction that ended in tragedy. Almost instantly, Marlin found himself at the center of blame, accused by many of being responsible for the death of the Intimidator. In the early days after the accident, he tried to speak. "It was an accident. I never wanted that to happen," he told reporters, his voice trembling, but his words did little to calm the anger. Under immense pressure and heartbreak, Marlin chose to withdraw from the public eye, not to hide, but to protect the Earnhardt family from more pain. "I thought that if I spoke out, things might have gotten worse," he later said softly. "So I chose to remain silent and let time answer." But silence brought no peace. Night after night, the crash replayed in his mind. The sound of metal, the sight of Dale's car, the weight of what followed. "There were nights I couldn't sleep," he confessed. "I kept asking myself if I could have done something differently. But the truth is, it was just an accident. I never meant to hurt anyone, especially Dale." The truth revealed. When the official investigation was finally released, the truth became undeniable. Dale Earnhardt's death was not caused by another driver. It was the result of outdated safety standards. The lack of protective equipment, like the HANS device and modern barrier walls, had made the crash far deadlier than it appeared. Back then, most drivers, including Earnhardt himself, refused to wear the HANS device. They found it restrictive, uncomfortable, and unnecessary. No one could have imagined that this decision would cost NASCAR its greatest legend. But from that tragedy came transformation. Earnhardt's death became the catalyst for sweeping safety reforms that would forever change the sport. Years later, Sterling Marlin chose to break his silence, not to clear his name, but to honor the man he admired. "Dale was a great driver and a wonderful person. No one can replace him," Marlin said quietly, his voice filled with respect. He also thanked his family, friends, and those who stood by him through years of blame and sorrow. Marlin's heartfelt confession brought a sense of closure, not only for himself, but for fans who had carried the pain of that day for over 2 decades. It was a reminder that even in tragedy, there can be purpose. When asked what kept him moving forward, Marlin said simply, "Dale will always be a part of NASCAR. I just hope what we went through made the sport safer. That's the best way to honor him, the man who changed NASCAR forever." Dale Earnhardt, the Intimidator, wasn't just a racer. He was the heartbeat of NASCAR. His presence on the track was electric, his determination unmatched, and his impact impossible to measure. More than a driver, he was a force that transformed stock car racing from a southern pastime into a global spectacle. With 76 career victories and 7 Cup Series championships, Earnhardt joined the ranks of racing immortals. His fearless, aggressive style, bumping, blocking, and taking risks others wouldn't dare, thrilled fans and terrified opponents. To millions, he represented the purest form of competition, bold, relentless, and unshakably confident. But Earnhardt's influence went beyond the racetrack. His charisma and swagger drew new fans, major sponsors, and national attention to the sport. The iconic black number, 3 Chevrolet, became more than a car. It became a symbol of grit, courage, and American determination. Then, in February 2001, tragedy struck. While protecting his teammates, including his own son, at the Daytona 500, Dale Earnhardt lost his life in a crash that stunned the world. His death exposed NASCAR's urgent need for reform and led to sweeping safety changes. The mandatory hands device, safer barriers, and redesigned cars that have since saved countless lives. Though he's gone, Dale Earnhardt's legacy endures in every race, every driver, and every roar of the crowd. His spirit, fierce, fearless, and unbreakable, continues to drive NASCAR forward. A legend that will never fade. More than 20 years after Dale Earnhardt's tragic passing, his legacy remains as powerful as ever. He wasn't just a driver. He was the embodiment of strength, grit, and determination. The sight of the black number, 3 car, and that unmistakable grin still live in the hearts of millions, a reminder of a man who changed racing forever. His legacy continues through his son, Dale Earnhardt Jr., who carries his father's spirit every time he steps onto the track. "My dad always said nothing is impossible if you don't give up," Dale Jr. once shared, a lesson that has shaped his life both on and off the circuit. The innovations that followed Dale's death, from the hands device to improved barriers and car designs, have since protected countless drivers like Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott, many of whom have expressed gratitude for the man who unknowingly saved their lives. To fans, Dale Earnhardt will always be more than a NASCAR champion. He's a symbol of perseverance and heart. From tattoos of the number 3 to annual tributes at Daytona, his spirit still roars across every racetrack in America, the final message of Sterling Marlin. Now, at 67, Sterling Marlin has finally opened up about that day, the day the racing world lost the Intimidator. Sitting in a softly lit room, Marlin reflected not just on the crash, but on the man he had raced beside for years. "I can't change the past," he said quietly, but Dale's life was full of meaning. He remembered Earnhardt's half-smile, his fire, and his loyalty, both as a competitor and as a friend. "Dale always gave his all," Marlin said. His message was simple: live fully, never stop giving, and love the sport with all your heart. Though the tragedy still lingers, Marlin chooses to focus on the legacy it created. "Dale changed NASCAR forever," he reflected. "That's how he should be remembered." With a deep breath, he added a final word of gratitude. "Thank you, Dale, for making me a better driver and a better man." As he looks out at the Daytona Speedway, Marlin says he can still feel Earnhardt's presence, like a whisper carried on the wind. "Live fully. Race like today is your last," he said softly. "That's how Dale would want us to live." Even in death, Dale Earnhardt's influence endures, a legacy of courage, unity, and transformation that continues to define the soul of NASCAR.